The image of man betrays that which distinguishes him from all other beings: his ability to observe himself. It is man's fate that he not only rejoices in what he sees, but is displeased by his faults, physical and mental. Man's urge to civilize compels him to strive for the improvement not only of his material conditions, but of himself as well, to prune and to cultivate. The image of man bears witness to this ambition. Around 1900, eugenics, race hygiene, the idea of improving the human species would become the new century's scientific credo. The message is dramatic. The biological development of man is in conflict with the civilization he has constructed. Hereditary decay, degeneration, leads to doom. In the face of this dilemma, two means of escape are offered: to turn the clock back, to retreat, or to stem the imminent catastrophe with the aid of science. Art, the exalted artifact of self-contemplation. The classical image of man strives for beauty, harmony free from disturbing reality. The despair man seems to feel in the face of his own inadequacy, his inability to live up to the image he himself has created, moves us in its impotence. The image of man fills us at times with compassion. What nature does blindly, slowly, and ruthlessly, man may do providently, quickly, and kindly, says the British scientist Francis Galton. According to Galton, man's evolution is impeded by the fact that inferior people procreate more rapidly. The idea that life, society, the family, can be cultivated like a garden in which the weeds must be distinguished from the useful plants is something that Galton wants to develop into a science. He calls his idea eugenics. Eugenics, the control of natural selection, offers two alternatives: positive eugenics, the improvement of the human species by mating superior individuals, breeding; negative eugenics, preventing people with inferior characteristics from reproducing. Since the achievements of Darwin, we perceive the world in a new light, the German art journal Pan proclaims, and only a modern aesthetic based on his theory can accurately reflect the aspirations of our times. The object of this praise is Jugendstil, Art Nouveau. The emergence of biological science provides man with a new perspective on life. The concept of degeneration now has an optimistic antithesis: biology as the redeemer of the Western world. The whole world is in bloom, and even art conveys the message. Science seems not only to offer an understanding of nature, but also the ability to intervene and adjust. Everything is biology, and like man himself, society is an organism ruled by its laws. New discoveries and ideas produce new movements and beliefs. Our way of life must be reformed. How one lives, what one eats, the way one dresses reflects biological consciousness. Clothing plays havoc with the selection process, claims Richard Ungewitter, a pioneer of the German nudist movement. In order to promote sound selection, I demand a culture of nudity so that the strong and healthy may mate. To reject clothing is to be liberated from the decay of modern society and demonstrates racial consciousness. For the human body to achieve perfection, says Ungewitter, to create out of Homo sapiens the ideal living work of art, we must enlist the services of conscious human breeding. The goals of nudism's apostle are not very far removed from the budding ambitions of science. As the new science makes its way into universities, a voluntary army of wild-eyed reformers, racial fanatics, and health zealots rally round the banner of race hygiene. The watchword of the day is eugenics. Throughout the civilized world, race hygiene ideas take root. This campaign aims at liberating America from defective heritage. If man could be induced to fall in love intelligently, if human matings could be placed upon the same level as horse breeding, the most progressive revolution in history could be achieved, says Charles Davenport, the father of the eugenics movement in the United States. Davenport founds an institute for evolutionary research on Long Island and sets up the Eugenics Record Office. His dream is to create a nationwide eugenics register. Davenport trains field workers who visit poorhouses, prisons, and mental wards. His goal is to document and eliminate inferior hereditary characteristics. The champions of eugenics find support in racial theories and concepts of degeneration. The movement gains momentum through an aggressive campaign against blacks and immigrants. Nowhere else does the practice of eugenics score such early successes. In 1907, the world's first compulsory sterilization law is introduced. Over 20 states soon pass similar laws. Tens of thousands are sterilized. In 1922, in the small country of Sweden, the world's first government institute of race biology is established. "12 years later, a unanimous parliament passes a sterilization law. The Institute of Race Biology in Uppsala, under its founder Herman Lundborg, is the center of Swedish race research. In the course of endless travel, material is gathered. Photographs and physical measurements of thousands of Swedes. In the pursuit of positive and negative heritage, towns and parishes, prisons and correctional institutions are visited. In Germany, the Swedish efforts arouse admiration. The Institute of Race Biology in Uppsala, writes the journal Die Sonne, will rouse Germany's dawning race research to life. Beyond the purely scientific motives, the Swedes are committed to the pride and welfare of their Nordic blood, and like us, to the Nordic idea, which once again, and for even more profound reasons, strengthens the ties that bind Sweden and Germany. The Institute places peculiar emphasis on anthropological measurements and ethnic attributes. Despite this, race hygiene would be integrated into Swedish social policy. During the 1920s and 30s, Sweden becomes a progressive welfare state in which ethnic conflict is virtually unknown. A passion for social justice, preserving the physical and mental health of the Swedish stock, is the rallying cry. Race hygiene is seen as central to the well-being of modern society. In Sweden, race hygiene theories merge with the vision of the welfare state. Social engineers are responsible for organizing society for the greater good. The nation ranks higher than the individual. The Swedish stock must be protected from inferior and foreign elements, fortified to meet the growing demands of modern society. Individuals with inferior traits must be prevented from procreating. Positive eugenics, breeding, is still a dream. Thus, negative eugenics must be accepted. The sterilization law is not compulsory. The Swedish variety is democratic. Opposition shall be overcome through persuasion. If our civilization's best elements are to survive, human husbandry, based on the principles of scientific agriculture, is necessary, the American Eugenics Society proclaims. The gospel spreads from state to state. The message is disseminated at rallies and fairs. Eugenics competitions are arranged. Participants undergo intelligence tests and medical examinations. A jury judges the family's pedigree. The winning families receive prizes. Parallel to the advance of eugenics, American genetic research leads the world.
Wir haben Geburtenschwund, Gegenauslese und Rassenmischung als die Hauptgefahren erkannt, die ein Volk zum Abgrund führen können. Damit sind aber die gefährlichen Einflüsse, denen ein Kulturvolk unterliegen kann, noch nicht erschöpfend dargestellt. Wir müssen uns vielmehr die Frage vorlegen, ob nicht die modernen Lebensformen, wie sie ein Kulturvolk nur einmal hat und zum Teil auch haben muss, in sich Faktoren haben, die zu einer allmählichen Entartung, zu einer Degeneration führen. Der Schicksalsweg der Völker kennt keinen Stillstand. Er kennt nur Aufstieg oder Niedergang. Ein Volk muss Hammer oder Amboss sein. Der Wert des Blutes, der Wert der Rasse entscheidet. Das deutsche Volk hat seinen Wert gezeigt. Es muss zum Kern eines großgermanischen Reiches werden. Dann wird es uns gelingen, den Beweis auch dafür zu erbringen, dass wohl der einzelne Mensch sterblich ist und sein Leben mit dem Tode endet. Dass aber ein Volk sich in jeder Generation schöner und kraftvoller erneuern kann zu einem ewigen Leben.
A small village in Bavaria. A home for unwed mothers was once located here, founded by the Lebensborn Society. Here, unmarried women considered racially pure could give birth in solitude, far from the disapproving eyes of society. Lebensborn, a movement founded by SS leader Heinrich Himmler, was assigned a more extensive task, however: positive eugenics and breeding. But a conflict lurks which seems to have paralyzed the movement. Positive eugenics requires the subordination of sexuality to the quality of offspring, the separation of reproduction and love. wild rumors and fantasies about human breeding farms run by the SS flourished. Thus, creating the new German man uncovered a paradox which challenged bourgeois morality. It was also in direct conflict with one of the pillars of Nazi ideology, the institution of the family. Lebensborn was reduced to a shelter for women who had transgressed the dictates of German morality, preventing Aryan blood from being lost to abortion. While convention and morality raised obstacles to positive eugenics, the practice of negative eugenics involved no such conflict. Infants judged to be unfit were put to death. Germany, 1943. While Nazi racial policy strives toward its diffuse goals, it is the task of the artist to promote a positive image of its stated intentions. In Germany, negative eugenics leads to the ultimate horror. German racial policy results in the endless purging of inferior human material. 400,000 Germans are forcibly sterilized, 100,000 murdered, before the race hygiene project culminates in a policy of mass extermination. December 1944. In the small country of Sweden, sheltered from the storms of war, an ideal child competition is held.
Professorn förklarar att de 3- och 4-åringar som tävlingen varit öppen för är duktigare än någonsin. Raffinerade lockbeten används av juryn som består av Dr. Hultman, professor Lichtenstein, fru Rybrandt och Dr. Severin.
In Sweden, the race hygiene impulse has taken the form of an accelerating sterilization program. 8,000 people have been deprived of the ability to have children. The number of sterilizations would continue to climb after the war. Compulsory provisions have been added to the sterilization law. It would be over 30 years before the law is repealed. Underneath the streets of the city, the graveyards of civilization, the biological remnants of heredity. Oh, these new sciences, Emile Zola writes 100 years ago. These sciences that still speak the stammering language of hypotheses and have not liberated themselves from the power of imagination. They belong just as much to the poet as they do the scientist. What tremendous fresco remains not to be painted? What colossal human comedy and tragedy to be written? The material with which the question of heredity provides us seems infinite. speculation on the meaning of biological heredity has had a fateful impact on political and scientific ideas in the 20th century. Today we know how heredity works. Research on human genetic makeup is in the vanguard of modern science. As political and social utopian theories lose ground, the biological ideal acquires a new lease on life. Visions on genetics and its social implications occasionally assume utopian proportions. In man's effort to define himself, he continually encounters new obstacles to overcome. The idea of controlling the future by means of genetics remains a dream. Man, who he is and what ultimately shapes him, is shrouded in mystery. Man has created a civilization which isolates him from nature and imprisons him in a conflict between pressing forward and longing for the past. A civilization driven by the concept of endless progress, that knowledge can eternally open new doors. The idea of improving himself through biological means has accompanied man for thousands of years. The faith in measurements transforms this idea into science. Eugenics is the dream of a measurable man. In the exploration of heredity, and in the search for a decipherable code, man's intelligence constantly comes to the fore. What role does genetic heritage play? What is biological necessity, and what can be molded by environment and upbringing? The genetic code, the human recipe, is a logical structure which can be mapped and recorded. But man's capacity can only be judged by his actual achievements. For man's talent, there is no decipherable code. Intelligence is a basic prerequisite for our civilization. But about the biology of the thinking process and man's capabilities, we know very little. The image of man sometimes reveals despair in the face of this reality. The image of man fills us at times with compassion.